Imagine opening a train car, not a passenger train, not a military transport, a cattle car. Now imagine the smell hits you first, a thick, sweet, rotten smell that burns your lungs. And when your eyes adjust to the darkness, you realize the floor isn't wood. It's bodies, thousands of them. Now imagine that the men responsible are still alive, standing nearby, asking politely to surrender. What would you do? April 29th, 1945, a Sunday morning. The sky over southern Germany was heavy and gray. The air was bitterly cold. The war in Europe was almost over. American soldiers from the U.S. 45th Infantry Division, known as the Thunderbirds, were advancing toward a large complex near Munich. Intelligence reports suggested it was nothing special. Possibly a factory, possibly a supply depot, another objective, another task before the war finally ended. No one warned them. No briefing prepared them. No words could have. As they moved forward, the soldiers reached a railroad track just outside the compound. There was a train sitting there. 39 cattle cars, rust-covered, silent, motionless. Something was wrong. The soldiers smelled it before they fully understood it. Veterans of combat froze in place. A lieutenant climbed onto one of the cars and slid the door open. And then he screamed. Inside the train were bodies, thousands of them, men, women, children, starved beyond recognition, beaten, emaciated, skin stretched tightly over bone. They were stacked on top of one another like discarded objects. No coffins, no dignity, no mercy. They had been abandoned there to die of thirst, hunger, and exposure. Some bodies had bite marks. The living had tried to survive by eating the dead. The soldiers stared in silence. These were not recruits. These were not naive men. They had fought in Italy. They had fought in France. They had watched friends die screaming in the mud. But nothing in war had prepared them for this. One 19-year-old soldier from Oklahoma dropped his rifle, sat down in the snow, and began crying uncontrollably. Another turned away, gagged, and vomited. Others simply stood still. The shock lasted only moments. Then it transformed. Grief turned into fury, cold, focused, uncontrollable rage. Hands tightened around rifles, jaws clenched, eyes locked onto the SS watchtowers looming in the distance. Something inside them snapped. In that moment, the rules of war dissolved. The Geneva Convention ceased to exist. Orders faded into background noise. Only one emotion remained: revenge. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, the senior officer on the ground, sensed the danger immediately. "Keep moving," he shouted. "Don't look at the train." But how could anyone obey that order? More than 2,300 corpses stared back at them with hollow, frozen eyes. Every step forward felt heavier. As the soldiers advanced, they reached the main gate of the camp. The commandant had fled, but the SS guards were still there. Among them was a young officer named Heinrich Wicker. Wicker knew the war was lost. He knew resistance was pointless. So he did what officers were trained to do. He put on his cleanest uniform, polished his boots carefully, straightened his collar. Then he stepped forward, holding a white flag. "I surrender this camp to the United States Army," he said calmly. An American officer looked at him, at his clean uniform, at his well-fed face. Then he looked past him, at the piles of starved corpses, and he spat in Wicker's face. The surrender ended right there. As American troops poured into the camp, chaos exploded. More than 30,000 prisoners, living skeletons, rushed toward the fences. They were crying, laughing, collapsing to the ground. Some kissed the soldiers' boots. Some screamed in disbelief. "Americans! Americans!" Freedom had arrived. But justice had not. While the prisoners celebrated survival, the soldiers were hunting. Near a coal yard inside the camp, a group of SS guards attempted to surrender. They emerged slowly, as if the war were still following rules. Hands raised high, helmets removed, faces pale with fear. Their voices trembled as they shouted the only words they believed could save their lives. "Hitler kaputt! Hitler finished!" They repeated it again and again. They believed those words were magic. They believed surrender still meant protection. They believed the Americans would behave like soldiers, not like witnesses. They were wrong. Standing nearby was an American lieutenant, widely believed to be Jack Bushyhead. Moments earlier, he had walked past the crematorium. The ovens were still warm. The air was thick with the smell of burned flesh. Human ash still clung to the walls. This was not history to him. This was not evidence. This was reality. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't issue a formal command. He said nothing at all. Instead, he slowly raised his hand and gestured with his Thompson submachine gun. The message was unmistakable. The SS guards were ordered against a brick wall. About 50 men. They hesitated. Some protested. Some whispered prayers. Only now did they understand. A heavy machine gun was dragged into position and mounted on a tripod. Metal clanked loudly in the cold air. A bolt slid into place. The sound echoed across the yard. The lieutenant looked at the gunner. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then he nodded. 10 seconds. 10 seconds of sustained machine gun fire. The noise was deafening. Men screamed. Bodies collapsed. Dust and smoke filled the air. When it was over, the yard was silent again. The snow beneath their feet was black with coal dust and soaked dark red with blood. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks heard the gunfire and ran toward the coal yard. He arrived to find bodies piled against the wall, some still twitching. He fired his pistol into the air. "Stop it! What the hell are you doing?" The machine gunner slowly turned toward him. His hands were shaking. Tears streamed down his face. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't apologizing. "They deserved it," he said, and he meant every word, but the coal yard was only the beginning. Across the camp, similar scenes were unfolding. At Tower B, SS guards attempted to surrender by climbing down ladders, their hands raised above their heads. American soldiers didn't wait for explanations. They opened fire. Bodies were struck mid-descent and fell into the moat below. Some guards tried to swim. The soldiers walked calmly to the edge and emptied their magazines into the water, just to be sure. Years later, one American GI wrote home, "It wasn't combat. It wasn't chaos. It was an execution. And after what I saw in those boxcars, they weren't human to me anymore." But the Americans were no longer the only executioners. The prisoners wanted revenge, and they wanted it now. They dragged SS guards from hiding places, from watchtowers, from basements and storage rooms. They were weak, starving, barely able to stand, but adrenaline gave them strength. They attacked with shovels, with sticks, with stones, with their bare hands. Bones broke, blood spilled. American soldiers stood nearby smoking cigarettes, watching. An officer asked quietly, "Should we stop them?" A sergeant didn't hesitate. "No," he said, "let them finish." For nearly an hour, Dachau became a lawless zone. No ranks, no courts, no rules. The victims became judges, juries, executioners. Eventually, Colonel Sparks restored order. He locked up the surviving Germans, not to punish them, but to protect them from his own men and from the prisoners. But the truth couldn't remain hidden. Cameras had been there. Photos were taken. Photos of dead SS guards. Photos of American soldiers standing over bodies. An investigation was launched. The official report concluded that U.S. troops had violated international law. It recommended court-martials. The report reached General George S. Patton. Patton studied the photos in silence. The executed guards, the coal yard, the death train. Then he exploded. You expect my boys to follow a rule book after seeing that? After walking past 2,000 dead bodies? Hell no. The investigation was buried. No trials, no punishment. The soldiers were sent home. They never spoke publicly about that day. Today, Dachau stands as a memorial to more than 30,000 victims of the camp. There is no memorial for the SS guards executed against the wall. They were buried in unmarked graves, forgotten. History judged them long ago, and history still argues about the Americans. Was it murder, or was it justice? That is the hardest question in war. If you had smelled the train, if you had opened those doors, if you had seen what they saw, would you have pulled the trigger? Be honest. Let me know in the comments.